right. So it looks like we'll have a smaller group in here today, but that's okay. We have our live stream going, which is now our more popular option. So hello to the live stream group. So today we're going to do a workshop on health professions interviewing. And so my name is Lauren Albaum, and I'm with the Division of Health Professions Advising. And so we're made up of a couple advisors and some certified advisors across campus who help with all areas of building a competitive application. This workshop is designed mainly for students who are in the throes of interviewing, about to interview. They have already applied. If you have not done so, that's okay. It's still really good information to know for the future. But we're going to start out talking just briefly about what are professions interviews, why we need them, and what the process looks like. So keep in mind that if you're getting to the interview stage, you probably have already gone through a primary application and a secondary application. And then, yay, great, you have gotten an interview, or maybe you're hoping to get that interview. If you are someone who hasn't applied yet, then this is also good information to know. Or maybe you're just in the primary application stage and you're still waiting for secondaries. Do know that most schools are going to have a secondary before there's going to be an interview. That's not a rule, but for a majority of schools, you're probably going to have that secondary first. Why? Because primary applications really only address basic information that the centralized application service asks of all applicants. So transcript information, kind of basic activities, but it doesn't get at the heart at the individual school questions. Why that school? Why our curriculum? Maybe they want to know if you took online classes or not. So there may be things that they ask individually in a secondary application before they ever ask you to come and interview. Also, keep in mind that if you're getting an interview, this is a great thing. They do not interview everyone. They cannot interview everyone. So if you have made it to the interview stage, you have at least gone through some level of competition and the pool has become smaller. An interview does not mean you are an automatic acceptance, but it does mean that you've probably gone from, if you're in med school, for example, somewhere around 4,000 to 6,000 applicants down to maybe 300 to 600 applicants that are being interviewed. Hopefully, once you go through the interview, you do get that acceptance. Keep in mind, though, when you get to the interview stage, they're no longer assessing your academic credentials. They have already reviewed that. They know that you can meet their academic performance profile. They feel confident that you will be able to be successful in their program. Hence why now they want to interview you. The interview is no longer necessarily just about your ability to be successful in the classroom. It's more of, are you a good fit for their program specifically? So, any one of that 300 to 600 applicants that they interview could be a successful candidate for their program. But are you one of the, let's say, depending on the program, anywhere from maybe 40 students to 150 students that they want to bring in? Are you one of those? And is that the fit? So know that if you get an interview, you are a great applicant. You are a quality applicant. Now they're looking to see if you are the right applicant for them and vice versa. I can't stress that enough. So why do we do interviews at all? Right, again, it's going beyond being a strong candidate. You are a strong candidate if you get an interview. You are great. Hold on to that. But know that that's not everything. So they're also going to be doing it to see, are you professional? Are you personable? These things that they aren't maybe able to grasp from a paper application, right? Some people write really well and have great oral communication skills, but do you have written communication skills? But do you also have great oral communication skills? You're going to have to talk with your patients. You're going to have to express yourself in other ways just than writing. Did you just say things that sounded good, or that maybe you were coached? Maybe you had a health professions advisor who helped you significantly. That's wonderful, and that is what we're here to do. But now they need to see who you are at your core, what your vision is, what your motivation is for healthcare, without having the 15th draft revision And the coached responses is that truly who you are? And know that a good interview will generally end up in a acceptance, more so than obviously submitting a primary and secondary application, because you are down to maybe only double the amount of applicants than there are seats, right? So the pool has shrunk quite significantly, but if you don't get that acceptance, that again isn't a testament to your performance or ability. It just maybe means that there's a better fit for you elsewhere and for possibly the school as well. So we'll break this up into before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview, so that you get kind of all the stages. Before the interview, I won't say is the most important, but I would argue that it is maybe neck and neck with during the interview, right? Before the interview, you must prepare. You must prepare substantially for the interview. And there's a couple things that we're going to want you to do to prepare, and we've broken it down into 3 different sections. So the first section that you have to do to prepare is to know yourself. We talk about this extensively with personal statements, and we're going to talk about it extensively with interviews, because you are who they are trying to admit or decide if they want to admit, deciding if you're a good fit. Not the Student Doctor Network best candidate thread, not who mom and dad said will make a good candidate. Who are you? What at your core makes you a great individual, a great learner, a great future healthcare professional? Who are you? And do you know that about yourself, right? These are really deep questions that if you don't know yourself, it's going to be very hard to come across in a genuine fashion to lead them to believe that you're a good fit. So a lot of self-evaluation has to go into this. Who are you as an individual? That's a very deep question. Who are you as an individual? What do you stand for? You know, what are your best qualities? What are your worst qualities? Right? Who do you want to be? What impact do you want to leave on the profession? And these are big, big things that you need to know about yourself. How will you fit into the role of a healthcare professional now? And how will you fit into the role of a healthcare professional 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now? That takes a lot of kind of multifaceted thought process, because you're needing to know who you are, who you plan to be, where you think the profession may go, how you continue to fit into that. And there's not a right or wrong answer, but it must be a well thought out, a reflective answer. You have to have thought of these things. And then what experiences helped you shape these ideals? A lot of times you'll hear me say, it's not necessarily what you did, it's why it mattered, right? I tell a lot of the students in my class, right, if it sounds good, great, but that doesn't really matter. What did you do? What did you learn? What did you experience? How did it impact you, right? We are no longer at the stage of, that is impressive when I tell mom, dad, grandma, and grandpa, because it sounds good, right? We are at the stage of, why did it matter? What did you learn? How did it impact you, right? So anything that you do, can you tell me why it was meaningful, how it made you who you are today, and how it's going to impact the future self, the future healthcare self? And then make sure you've reviewed your application before you go. You put information in there about yourself. You need to know what it said. You definitely don't want to, know yourself, know what you put about yourself in the application, right? And know that they've already read it. So this is, again, right, I highlighted in the beginning, this is no longer an academic performance test, right? So talking extensively about your GPA is going to eat up a lot of that interview time on things they already know, right? They already know your GPA. They already, even if it's a closed file interview, which we'll talk about in a second, where they don't actually know your GPA, they know that if you got to the interview, that you have a high enough GPA, right? So they're no longer necessarily concerned with as much if you can handle the courses. Now they're more, who are you? Why would you be a good fit for us? So after you know yourself, you have to know the profession, right? And a little bit of knowing yourself is obviously going to be weaved into that. But how has it changed? How will it continue to change? Or what do you believe is going to impact the profession? What qualities and traits do you believe would make a good healthcare professional? Be careful, right? We talk about that a lot. You are not regurgitating what the Division of Health Professions Advising has hammered into your head is what they need to be in the future. What qualities and traits have you researched, do you believe would make a good healthcare professional, using information that we've provided, but don't let this be a robot answer. If I ask you how any current event, anything, the upcoming election, the Zika virus, that one's pretty straightforward. But if anything that's happening, the refugee crisis, how is that going to impact healthcare? How would that impact you as a healthcare professional, right? How do you have an answer? Can you see the correlation? Can you talk about it? It doesn't mean you have to take a stand on it. We would actually maybe encourage you to tread lightly on taking a controversial stand on any one way or another on a controversial topic, all right? That's not to say you cannot have a stand, but this is not a pulpit, right? Your interview is not a pulpit to convince everyone in the room of your stand. So you can have a stand, but obviously tread lightly with some maybe more controversial topics. However, can you at least talk about them in an educated manner and know how they would impact healthcare, could help impact healthcare? And then knowing the school. Super important. If you've done a secondary, this should be old hat because you should have already done extensive research on the school before you ever paid more money to submit a secondary application. Really and truly, you should have done extensive research before you ever even applied to that school, because one of the things we talk about in our office is having a specific rationale for every school you apply to. But at this stage, you should already have tons of research on the schools, but make sure before you go in that you refresh that information, right? So if there's any alumni you can talk to, that's a great way to see maybe the inside scoop. Some schools even have kind of ambassadors that they'll let you kind of speak with before you get there. There are people there as well the day of. Note that when you're there the day of, though, you're being interviewed. If there are ambassadors there and you're asking questions, you're being interviewed at all times. Do you know their mission? So many schools nowadays are mission-driven. Mission-driven meaning that they abide strongly, they feel strongly, and they try to embody that mission. So if their mission talks extensively about research, they probably have an emphasis on research, right? If their mission talks significantly about underserved populations, they probably have a soft spot for working with underserved populations. Do you know their mission? Is there anything in it that you feel strongly about as well? What is their curriculum, their teaching facilities, their teachers, their faculty members, their location? Is there anything specific about that program that made you want to go there or that you particularly enjoy? They will probably ask you about their curriculum on some level, or why do you prefer our school at a minimum? Why would you like to come to our school? And what values or priorities, again, this is a lot knowing yourself, align with that school, right? There's a mission fit webinar that's really good. We do post it on our website from the AAMC, and it talks a lot about aligning the mission with your personal values, that school's mission. Ensure you've prepared questions for the interviewees as well. Just like in a job interview, and they say, do you have any questions for us? The answer in a job interview is yes, and here are my questions. The same thing for a health professions interview. You do not want to say no. Right? Even if they have answered the majority of your questions that you may have had, you don't want to look as if you are unprepared or uninterested, right? There should be questions that you can come up with that are probably not going to be addressed, that are intelligent, that are not stated on the website, things that could be easily found, that are things you do truly want to know about the program. So those are the main three things, right? Knowing yourself, knowing the profession, and knowing the school. You must have done extensive research on this, deeply self-evaluation before you go, but do note that we aren't going to recommend that you memorize a script of those things, right? No memorizing of a script. You are not a robot, you are a person. but you're gonna practice. You're gonna practice, practice, practice. There are common questions. One of the handouts in the back, and that can be found on our website for those who are watching live, is common questions, a common question handout. There are more than what are on there. There you can Google health profession common interview questions and you will get tons of them. You can't go wrong practicing as long as you don't start to sound robotic. You're going to get some type of question that asks you to tell them about you, or tell them why you're here today, or tell them why our school, tell them why you enjoy medicine, dentistry, whatever it is. There will be some combination of these questions. They may not be exactly worded in these exact terms, but they will be there. We always like to put a little note here too that you could be asked about personal issues, especially if you brought them up in your personal statement. Now, I like to tell students before writing a personal statement, if you have personal things that you would like to disclose, you feel comfortable disclosing them, great, but do know they could ask about them because you put them out there. So be aware, again, that's part of that going back through your application and looking over it. You know, sometimes students are disclosing things that are very close to the heart, and that is fine if you felt comfortable doing so. If you did, though, you do maybe want to be mentally prepared for them to bring that up, especially if it's something that you have trouble talking about. Hopefully, if it's something you have extreme trouble talking about, you didn't put it in your interview or your personal statement. But if you did, know that it could be something that they maybe bring up. It is okay if you show emotion in an interview, but we don't necessarily want you to be so unconsolable that you can't continue with the rest of the interview. So there's a you know, being passionate when you talk or when you speak about something is fine, but you want to be able to make sure that the true purpose of the interview isn't overshadowed by that passionate kind of story or experience. So know what you're comfortable revealing with them, right? And so know also, right, when you're practicing these questions, right, what are maybe appropriate responses, right? There, again, is a fine line between becoming a robot, but there are some things that we will want to avoid at all costs in an interview, and that can immediately tank your chances. Things like arrogance. You are going to be a servant leader, right? At the core of what healthcare professionals do, they are servant leaders. You are serving populations. And so it has to be remembered, humanism, right? Caring about others, saying, you know, I don't want to work with people. That's why I want to be, you know, an anesthesiologist because they're asleep. But you still have to work with them. So a lot of that goes with knowing the profession as well, but being aware of some of maybe these pitfalls that you don't want to say, things that you don't want to do, right? That I'm too awesome. Arrogance is a big one that we hear from schools that students maybe don't even realize how arrogant they are. You are, remember I said in the beginning, if you've made it to an interview, you are a great candidate. You are, but you're not the only great candidate, right? And so another thing I like to tell students too is continually talking about, if they say, you know, why are you a good fit for our program? Saying, because of my experiences. Okay, it's not bad, but everyone has good experiences. So what about those experiences? You're not the only one with 500 hours of shadowing. Everyone who got that far probably has that many hours or more. So what specifically, though, about you, right? Not just that you had experiences, right? Remember that everyone at that level is going to be a really quality applicant, right? And some other trickier questions, too. There's a lot of schools that are now going towards kind of nitty-gritty. So why medicine instead of PA then, right? Or why do you want to be a dental hygienist instead of a dentist? There's a fine line, too. You don't want to discredit any other health profession. Those are your colleagues. Those are your allies. Those are the people you will work with. We're an integrated healthcare system. We're moving more and more towards that model every day. But so do you know enough about the profession that you can articulate specifically why this one and not another, right? And we get a lot of times, again, more than surface level, A lot of times the answer to why do you want to be a blank is I want to help people. Okay, great, great. I help people. I am not any type of healthcare provider. I help a lot of people. No one wants me near them when they are unconscious. Nope, I don't know what I'm doing, right? So what about helping people? How are you going to help people? What about helping people, right? Because lots and lots of people help people. The depth of your response is so important. No surface level, right? It's like telling mom and dad, I do cancer research. They're going to be over the moon. You tell our office, I do cancer research. I'm going to say, great, why did it matter? What'd you learn? Right? So much, much, much past surface level. So again, in addition to the common questions, which we have the handout, right, there are a STAR method, which is one approach that we do recommend, especially as we move towards MMI models, which I'll talk about as well, the multiple mini interview, and even just for regular interviews where they will have generally at least one situational-based question. For situational-based questions or behavioral-based, so how would you respond questions when that's the root of the question. The STAR method is a really good example because usually they'll say, tell us about an instance where blank, or tell us about a time when you dealt with a difficult patient, right? A good model to think about for those kind of like, here's what happened, here's what I did questions are first you explain the situation or task. So briefly, but with specifics, remember, and then the action that you took, and then the results that you achieved. It's a quick way to think about it, and you could practice this. Again, with those common questions, you can practice the STAR method for those that are behavioral, right? Tell me about a time when you dealt with a difficult patient. You know, while I was working at Moffitt, there was a patient who was experiencing X, Y, and Z. Because their family member was not there, they felt uncomfortable. Action you took. I was able to locate the family member and bring them to them. And then the results are achieved. They felt so much more comfortable. They ended up writing a glowing review of the hospital. Right? This is not a good experience. I'm giving you a lackluster example, right? Not the example you want to give. But again, it goes through the quick steps of the situation, action, or situation or task, action, and then the result. Brief, concise, but with specifics. A lot of times with these behavioral questions where you're explaining something that has happened or what you would do, students go on and on and on and on. You'll lose them. You'll lose the point of the story. Remember that most of these interviews, if they're in a general interview, you're not going to have that much time per question. You do want to be able to get through the interview. You have to be, brevity is the soul of wit. I like to say that for personal statements and interviews as well. Being extremely verbose is great if you're talking to me because I talk a lot. But for the interview, you have to quickly get to the point. You have to quickly get to the takeaway of the point because otherwise you may lose them. So there's one great way, especially for stories. And if you don't have one, don't force it. Do not make something up. You can say something along the lines of, unfortunately, I don't know that I've had that happen to me, but I think if I had, here is how I would have responded, right? Or I don't think if it's something more specific that you maybe aren't sure how you would have responded. That has not happened to me. But I think that my skills in blank, blank, and blank may assist me in the future, and I look forward to utilizing them to get through that instance later on. Right? You're not making it up, right? Tell us about a time when a patient dropped dead in front of you. Well, this one time, you know, they may even be testing you, right? It doesn't have to have happened to you. You can still have a great response that doesn't have to be embellished or a lie. Make sure when you go that you're dressed appropriately. What I'm wearing today is not appropriate. Right? It's not appropriate, right? It's appropriate for my job. It's not appropriate for a formal health professions interview. Full suit is appropriate. I don't know how many people's Parents, grandparents used to say, better be overdressed than underdressed. In the health professions world, it's better to be overdressed than underdressed, right? Maybe some jobs are moving more and more casual. Great. Health professions, probably staying in the archaic view of this a little bit more than other areas. So you do want to be with dressed appropriately, proper fit. Attention to detail is some of the things that they could take away if you're not, if everything's wrinkled, if it's not fitting properly, right? You don't want them to believe that you don't have the poise or understanding or maturity to know what it takes to go into an interview, and you definitely don't want them to think you don't have attention to detail. So make sure that you are dressed appropriately and conservatively. This is not a fashion show, right? So most people know that one. And then I just like this one because I think you also have to be able to think on your feet, right? You are not going to be prepared for every question that they give you. You're not. You're not going to be prepared for everything that happens in the interview, especially if you're doing an MMI, which we're going to talk about in a second, right? But can you think quickly? Can you be flexible? This is also skills that are, I mean, the AAMC has resiliency, adaptability, as one of their 15 core competencies, right? Now, I don't think this would happen to anyone, but are you able to withstand the pressure? And how do you survive under that pressure? So making sure, again, that paying attention to detail, just some reminders. I won't read them all to you, but I do like to highlight this one. I encourage all students to bring at least some type of writing instrument, hopefully a nice looking Padfolio with a pen. You are not writing every word that they say, okay? But you may want to, if you're going into an interview where there's maybe only 3 people in the room, 3 to 5, not a whole lot who are interviewing you, you may want to try to get down their names so that you can write them a thank you note and name them afterwards. If you're going from interview to interview to interview to interview, that's probably not going to happen. But if you're going into one main interview with a handful of people on the other side, it's probably a good idea to try to at least jot down their names at some point during the interview if you can. That also is a place where you can maybe have a couple questions written down for them. And then also if there's any key takeaways. A lot of times when you're writing a thank you letter, it helps if you can write something distinctly that they said, right? So I really appreciated that your program does blank, blank, and blank that they just told you about. Or if they give you any information about their school, that may be something that you want to write down so that you can either, one, remember, because you're going to be so anxious and in the moment that you may forget, and 2, it may be helpful in that thank you. So interview days are going to vary greatly. It depends on the school. They completely get to decide how they're going to run their interview day, so keep that in mind. But a lot of times you'll have some combination of the following. A tour is generally, it generally happens at most. You generally will interact with other students. You're usually not the only student there who is interviewing that day. You may interact with current students. Remember, the second you step on campus, the second someone picks you up from the airport, the second anything, you are being interviewed, from the front desk receptionist to the dean of the college, right? You are being interviewed. I mentioned briefly, but I'll kind of say a little bit more in detail, the open versus closed interview. An open interview means that all members of the committee have reviewed your application, so they can see your GPA, they can see your test scores, they can see your experiences. And a closed interview means they cannot. And some schools do it for differently, and that's completely their prerogative. They won't necessarily tell you. They may tell you, but they might not. But again, remember, if you've gotten to that point, you are at least a good, you at least meet their academic performance profile. So they're not, you don't need to harp on that, even if it's a closed interview and they don't have it. And then generally, there tends to be either kind of the one-on-one small group or the MMI. Some schools are doing a little bit of both, but it generally tends to be kind of one or the other in the midst of this entire day. So the small interviews, the small interview sessions where it's maybe you and one other person, or you with a small group of maybe one current student and 2 search committee members, that would be kind of the traditional format. If that's what you're going for, or if that's the type of structure of that interview, you're going to go in, they're probably going to talk for a minute or 2, maybe about the school. They're going to ask you questions. They're going to ask if you have any questions, most likely. It will last anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how that school runs it. And that will be your one main interview. You may have a couple of those, depending on how the school does it. But that's the traditional format. Many schools, you might only do that once, but then you may have many other things throughout the day. Some schools have also started adding in to this tour day, I will mention, group interviews. So where you and a bunch of other candidates are all together, and they want to see how you interact. Or maybe they'll give a situation to the group and see how the entire group works together to respond. Does one person hog all the attention? Does one person not speak up at all? Right? Those are tricky because you don't know what they're going to ask. You don't know who else is in the group with you. Right? I would and so some students, I usually get the question, well, what if someone else won't stop talking? What if, like, they ask the group, like, how would you all handle this? And the one guy just won't stop, or one girl is just going on and on and on. How do I get a say? And it's tricky. It's hard to say without being there. It's hard to say without seeing the situation. I generally recommend the soft entrance if you can. If there is a great opportunity for you to say, that's so great, the same thing happened to me. Or, you're right, I would do the same thing, where you can swoop in and add to the conversation. I like to say it's like that game that a lot of people play with the improv, where one person starts it off and then you've got to continue it. If you have an opening where you can continue the story, that may be your way in. Very hard for me to say necessarily, though, without being there. But do know group interviews are becoming more and more popular. And then also gaining traction is the MMI, the multiple mini interview. The MMI, this one's from, I think, NYU, gives you kind of an overview of what this may look like, right? So it will start with one-on-one, situational based, a lot of times ethical situations. So you would start at somewhere along this path, and you would go into the room. You would be given a situation on a piece of paper that you would read. You would then have a few minutes to read it and come up with how you would approach that situation. You explain your response in a few minutes to the person who's in the room. They say, thank you very much, and you continue on. There is not a dialogue back and forth. There is a situation that you respond to, and then you move on. Some school, the person in the room maybe could do a slight dialogue, but generally speaking, the purpose of it is for you to then just answer the question and for them to assess you based on how you addressed that prompt, not necessarily a back and forth interview. Now, in this model, they do have a little bit of that kind of traditional interview at the end, or it could be in the middle. It's kind of depending on where you fall in the circle.
But generally, you're still doing the dialogue in one part of it.
Some schools do none of it. If they want to do just pure MMI, they could. Most schools are probably going to have at least some point where they could at least get something from you with the back and forth. Mm-hmm. So you can see the number of schools who do this now, and this is growing a little bit every year. We talked about this, but make sure you're treating everyone with respect. I usually say just turn off your cell phone. There's really nothing that's more important than this right now at that moment, short of some unfortunate extenuating circumstance. The body language and posture, you again are happy to be there. You are excited to be there. You are not the best thing since sliced bread. You and everyone else are all loaves of bread together, right? Like, great. So you are not standoffish. You are not arrogant posed. You are not so stressed out that you cannot handle it, right? You are there to make an impression, and your body language and posture will do that, or will add to that. So will eye contact and tone of voice. If you struggle to look someone in the eye, start working on it. Start working on it now, right? Because if you answer the interview questions like this, one, it's slightly odd, and it two leads them to maybe think that you're not confident, or maybe you're not sure of your answer, is usually what it kind of will lead to in an interview setting. And then express enthusiasm and interest, right? This does not mean that you jump out of your chair on every answer and like, I love this school so much. Like, there's a time and place for all areas of expression, but you do want to let them know that you want to go to their school, right? If they don't think that you want to go there, then why would they pick you, right? They'll pick someone else. They have more than enough people that they could choose from. There's a couple ways you can practice optimal interview. All USF students have access to optimal interview through their account. And so you can get that through the Career Center. You can log in. On your computer, it'll ask you some questions. Like, it'll have tentative med school questions, and you can actually, right from your desktop, it'll record you, and then you can watch it. Like, and you can watch yourself. You have a webcam with the responses. There's a little kind of guru guide on the side who'll like kind of give you hints and stuff, but you don't have to do that if you want to just practice with the questions and answer recording, seeing what you look like, seeing what your mannerisms are. I talk with my hands. Do you, touch your hair the whole time? Do you blink like a lot? Do you say all the time? What are your things that you're doing that maybe you don't notice? And then we do have mock interviews through our office. You do have to schedule them in advance, though, and those of you who know our office know how difficult it is to get in. There's not a secret passageway in to get in for a mock interview. It's all the same way, but we do have those. You can select that on the e-scheduler. There will be times when you'll have a meal as well, so I do want to make sure that I just touch on that. Because they may offer lunch and have lunch for the group. It's possible, especially if it's a longer day where they're maybe doing different tours. If you have the opportunity to do lunch, make sure that you're just aware of some of these things. Proper meal etiquette that hopefully people know, but we will add it here just in case you do not. We are adverse to drinking at any time. We are. If there's alcohol there, it's fine. You don't need it for the one day. Maybe that will change as we move more and more into a progressive society. But currently, just like with dress, we're going to say it's just not worth it, right? One glass of wine turns into 3 glasses of wine, and then you say something you regret. It just isn't worth it. It's one day. You don't need to drink. There's probably not going to ever be alcohol there, but if, for example, there could be a student who maybe was asked to stay overnight because maybe they were an MD PhD student, and then the next day they had a PhD interview, like for the same program, and then they were taken out to dinner by a student ambassador. Could easily happen, right? Just doesn't need to, because that student ambassador is still watching you. Like, just because they're taking you out to the sports bar for, for dinner, doesn't mean that they're not reporting back on how you act. We do encourage that you do thank the people that you can thank. If you can do a handwritten note, great. May not be possible. So that's fine. Then email one. Again, that's where if you did do a traditional interview with just a handful of people in the room, if you were able to get their names, you could probably go on that school's website, look them up on their directory, get their email, if you had their name, and shoot them an email thanking them. This is not another way to tell them about all the cool things you've been doing, right? This is not a third application. This is a thank you. Thank you for your time. I really appreciated learning about blank, blank, and blank. I'm still very interested in your program and hope to hear from you soon. Sincerely. right? This is not a, I forgot to mention that did this, and no, that's done. It's a thank you, right? You're thanking them for their time. They took this time out of their day. And you're maybe expressing still that you are still interested, right? That's okay, but not, this is another resume or everything you forgot to say. And an email again if you can't do the handwritten. We have a whole website or section of our website on interviewing. It'll have information about interviewing. It'll have the information about the types of interview. It has the handouts that are in the back. It has links to the mock interview or the optimal interview through the Career Center. So we do recommend that you read over that, look over that. It looks like this in case you were wondering. And then I'll take any questions. Yes.
Talking about religious stuff, political stuff. I mean, obviously, the student includes it in their application. I'm assuming that might come up. If interviewers could ask some questions about that. What if it's just the student wants to talk about how religion inspired them to do medical school? And,
great questions.
Everyone's a little different.
So great questions. The question is essentially, if you did talk in your personal statement or your application about maybe a student org that is religious or political in nature, or maybe in your personal statement about how maybe that was kind of part of your decision, that maybe influenced your decision to go into healthcare. What if that maybe more controversial or more of a judgment type area gets brought up, like religion or politics, since you put it in your application? I think there's a fine line. I think that there is a fine line between someone saying, so I see that you said that, you were at this religious conference where you learned about healthcare opportunities and how you can be a missionary as a healthcare provider. So tell us, where you see that going. There's a difference in the response being now a pulpit to talk about your religion, and then answering the question of, I am very religious, therefore I see how my strengths in, being passionate about my religion and being, interested in this and strong in this area will help me be a great healthcare provider who hopes to use my new gift in medicine to assist this population. There's a very fine line though between here is who I will be as a healthcare provider and here is you brought up religion, so let me talk about it, right? Like, let me convert you. And they will ask you most likely controversial questions. Your stance on abortion, your stance on state-assisted suicide, your stance on medical marijuana, right? They very likely will ask you some form of some type of ethical question for many schools. And it's not because they want to know, like, it's not like everyone on the committee is like, oh, we're pro this. So if they say that they're not, they're out. Can you have an intelligent response that is grounded in some type of research, right? That meaning you've looked into it past, like, I don't know, I think I'd probably be this. Like, do you have an informed opinion that comes from some area of intelligence that you can talk about without becoming overly passionate and unable to discuss with a varying viewpoint? And we lose some of that nowadays, right? I went to a great talk by the guys who do the Beloit College List. And they talked about how students nowadays, because they're so used to posting on Facebook, this is my stance, this is it. I said this, period, that everyone else who then says something different is attacking what they said, not discussing what they said. Can you discuss it without it being an attack on you, right? Which we're finding students are struggling. The debate, the dialogue is lacking. So that's more of what they're going to see that you can do. And I would encourage you maybe not to use this moment to convince someone that your stance is right. It's not the point. Yeah. Any other questions? It's a good one. All right. Thank you guys. You guys can email our office and then take the handout in the back. Thanks for coming.